Excusez-moi, madame, puis-je vous aider? The fluent melodic French was a ghost in the greasy air of the diner, a relic of a life Ilara Vance thought was long dead. To her cynical co-worker, she was just a show-off. In reality, she was a former Columbia scholar drowning in her mother's nursing home, her dreams of Paris buried under a mountain of grief. What Ilara didn't know was that the quiet grieving man in the corner booth was the billionaire Julian Sterling. She couldn't know that the lost elderly woman she was comforting was his late wife's mother, and she certainly couldn't know that when she softly recited a few lines of a Verlaine poem to soothe the old woman. She was speaking the exact sacred poem he and his beloved Isabel had called their own. As the billionaire's hand began to tremble, his coffee forgotten, Ilara thought she was just being kind to a lost tourist. She had no idea this single fateful act of compassion, this impossible cosmic coincidence, was about to end her life of despair. The man was not just going to leave her a tip, he was going to leave her a one-way ticket to Paris and a chance to reclaim the very soul she thought she had lost forever. The rain fell on the streets of Manhattan with a kind of weary persistence, the sort that seeped into the bones and made the city feel less like a concrete jungle and more like a waterlogged grave for R. Vance. The rhythm of the rain against the large plate glass window of the Hudson Corner Bistro was just another sound in the symphony of her exhaustion. It was Tuesday. Tuesday was the worst. It lacked the frantic energy of the weekend and the hopeful promise of a Friday. It was just a long gray corridor of a day. Her black non-slip shoes, the soles worn thin as a whisper, ached with a familiar deep-seated pain. She'd been on her feet for 7 hours, and she had 5 more to go. Ara moved through the narrow spaces between tables with an economy of motion born from years of practice. A ghost in a black apron refilling coffee cups, clearing away plates smeared with the remnants of overpriced omelets, and smiling a smile that never quite reached her tired hazel eyes. Those eyes, friends once told her, were her most captivating feature. They held flecks of gold that could sparkle like champagne, but that was a long time ago. Now they were just tired. The sparkle had been extinguished by the harsh fluorescent lights of the bistro and the heavier weight of responsibility. The Hudson Corner Bistro wasn't a bad place to work as far as diners went. It catered to a mix of upper-middle-class locals and the occasional tourist who'd wandered off the beaten path. The tips were decent enough to cover her rent on a shoebox apartment in Queens, and more importantly, the astronomical monthly bill from the Meadowlark Gardens nursing facility. That bill was the anchor chained to her ankle, pulling her deeper into the murky waters of her life. Vance Table 7 needs a check, and try to look like you're not planning a funeral, barked Chloe, her fellow waitress. Chloe, with sharp angles and sharper words, a woman who seemed to be fueled by a diet of caffeine and cynicism. She saw Ara's quiet demeanor not as exhaustion, but as arrogance. She resented the way spoke the soft cadence of her voice that hinted at an education Chloe herself never had. On it, Ilara murmured, forcing the muscles in her face to pull into another practiced smile. She glided over to Table 7, a couple bickering under their breath about a Broadway show. She placed the check down without a word, her presence barely registering. She was a function, not a person. A hand that delivered coffee. A voice that asked, "Will there be anything else?" It was in these moments of invisibility that her mind would drift. It would float away from the smell of bacon grease and stale coffee back to a sun-drenched classroom at Columbia University, back to the scent of old books and the thrill of deciphering medieval French poetry. She had been a star in the Romance Languages department, a prodigy on a full scholarship destined for a PhD at the Seigneur in Paris. Her professors spoke of her future in hushed, reverent tones. Ilara Vance has a gift, they'd say, a rare sensitivity to the nuances of language. Her dream had been so close she could taste it, the buttery croissant from a Parisian boulangerie, the crisp autumn air on the left bank, the life of the mind she so desperately craved. Then the phone call had come, the one that shattered everything. Her mother, a vibrant, loving art teacher, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. The decline was swift and brutal. Within a year, Ira's father, unable to cope with the shell of the woman he loved, had a massive heart attack and died. Suddenly, at 21, Ilara was an orphan and a caregiver. The scholarships, the dreams of Paris, the life of the mind, it all evaporated like mist. It was replaced by doctor's appointments, mounting debt, and the agonizing process of watching her mother forget her own name, then her own face, and finally her daughter. The nursing home was the only option, and it was a black hole of expense. So, Ilara Vance, the promising academic, became Ilara Vance, the waitress. She sold her father's small house to pay for the first few years. Now it was just the tips, just the endless aching Tuesdays. As she cleared a table near the window, she saw a man step out of a black town car. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored gray suit that seemed to repel the rain. He held no umbrella. He simply walked through the downpour as if it were a minor inconvenience he refused to acknowledge. He looked to be in his late 40s with sharp, intelligent features, dark hair threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, and an air of quiet, formidable power. He entered the bistro shaking the water from his coat, his eyes scanning the room with a swift, analytical glance. Chloe immediately perked up her cynical slouch, straightening. "Well, look what the storm dragged in," she whispered to Arara. "That's $100 tip walking." The man chose a small, secluded table in the back corner section. She grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her heart giving a small, anxious flutter. High-end customers could be a blessing or a curse. They could be generous, or they could be demanding and dismissive in a way that stung more than any overt insult. "Good afternoon," Ilara said, her voice soft. The man looked up, and for a second his gaze held hers. His eyes were a startlingly clear blue, but they were shadowed, carrying a profound sadness that resonated with her own. It was a look she recognized, the look of loss. "Just coffee black and a menu." "Thank you," he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm and controlled. He didn't smile. Ara nodded and turned to leave. Just as she did, the bell above the bistro door chimed again. An elderly woman stood there looking lost and frail. She was small, bundled in a thick woolen coat despite the mild autumn chill, a faded silk scarf tied around her head. She clutched a large, worn handbag to her chest like a shield. She looked around the room, her brow furrowed with confusion, muttering to herself in French. "Mon suis pas bon endroit. My God, where am I? This isn't the right place." Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, great, another tourist who can't read a map. You handle it, Professor." She sneered at Ara, using her favorite mocking nickname. Ara ignored the JBE. She felt a pang of sympathy for the old woman who looked so utterly overwhelmed. She approached her slowly, a genuine, gentle smile gracing her lips for the first time all day. The tired waitress receded, and for a fleeting moment the Columbia scholar emerged. The elderly woman's eyes, cloudy with age and confusion, darted around the bistro. She was a tiny island in a sea of hurried English chatter, and she was sinking. "Excuses, Moa?" Madame began, her voice flowing into the soft melodic cadence of Parisian French. "Excuse me, Madame. May I help you? You seem a little lost." The woman's head snapped up. Her relief was instantaneous and palpable. Her entire body seemed to unclench the fear in her eyes, softening into surprise and gratitude. "Oh, merci, our friend," she exclaimed, her voice thin and ready but elegant. "Oh, thank you, my child. You speak French." "Oui, madame," replied, guiding the woman to a small, empty table not far from the man in the gray suit. "Silver spear. Yes, madame. I speak it fluently. Sit down. Please breathe." From his corner table, the man in the suit, Julian Sterling, looked up from his menu. He had been a phantom in the room, wrapped in his own solitude, but at the sound of Era's French, he went still. The coffee cup, halfway to his lips, froze in midair. His sharp blue eyes, which had previously held a distant melancholic emptiness, now fixed on Ara with an unnerving intensity. It wasn't a look of idle curiosity. It was one of profound, almost painful shock, as if he were hearing a voice from a dream he'd long since forgotten. Chloe, watching from the service station, scoffed. "Show off," she muttered to the busboy, who just shrugged and continued filling water pictures. Era was oblivious to all of it. For these few minutes, she was no longer in the Hudson Corner bistro. She was transported. Speaking French was like unlocking a part of her soul that had been boarded up for years. It felt more natural, more her, than the tired English platitudes she served up with her coffee. The old woman explained, wringing her hands. Luan de la Riviere. I was supposed to meet my niece here, but my phone is dead, and I think I got the street name wrong. She said, the river corner comp said, soothingly, Kuond music. I understand. This is the Hudson corner. It's an easy mistake to make. Do you have a way to contact her? The woman who introduced herself as Madame Dubois looked distressed. No, alas, Teuton's Modi telephone. No, alas. Everything is in that cursed telephone. Thought for a moment. Allow me. She took out her own phone. What is her name? Perhaps I can find her online. As they sorted out the niece's contact information, their conversation deepened. Madame Jiwa, clearly an educated woman, noted the purity of Ara's accent. France pakandun ekolu on France. Your French is flawless, my dear, not the accent of an American school. Did you live in France? A shadow passed over's face. Set remarks. She confessed, her voice tinged with a melancholy that mirrored the woman's own far. It was the dream. I studied French literature at university. 19th century poetry was my specialty. Madame Dubois' eyes lit up. Pets prefer really. Who were your favorite poets? A real genuine smile bloomed on Ara's face. Baudelaire, Rimbaud Muren. Baudelaire, of course, Rimbaud. But I always had a soft spot for Verlaine. Ah, Varenne. Madame Dubois sighed, a wistful look in her eyes. Without thinking, Alara recited a few lines from Verlaine's Chien d'Orne, her voice soft and imbued with the poem's inherent sadness. Leon Glow. The long sobs of the autumn violins wound my heart with a monotonous languor. As the last word left her lips, a quiet reverence filled the space between them. For it was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a connection to the woman she used to be. But she had no idea what those words were doing to the man in the corner. Julian Sterling had lowered his coffee cup to the saucer with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. His face was pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. Every word of Verlaine's poem struck him like a physical blow. His late wife, Isabelle, had been French. She was a Parisian, a lover of poetry, a vibrant soul whose light had been snuffed out by a cruel, swift illness 2 years prior. And that very poem that was their poem. She would recite it to him on rainy autumn days, her head resting on his shoulder, her voice filled with the same gentle melodic sadness as the waitress's. Hearing it now in this generic diner from a young woman with tired eyes who looked like she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. It was surreal. It was agonizing. It was, he felt, with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty, a sign. Madame Dubois was now weeping softly, not from sadness, but from the emotional release. Ara had not only helped her find her niece's number, but had also gifted her a moment of shared humanity, a connection to a shared love of art and language. Veuve Unmad whispered, patting his hand. Sit on Couserve Cafe. You have the soul of a poet, my child. It's a crime that you are serving coffee. The words, meant as a compliment, landed like a punch in Ara's stomach. Gertrude Crucier. Yes, it felt like a crime. A life sentence she was serving for circumstances beyond her control. She helped Madame Dubois make the call, arranged for her to wait comfortably, and brought her a cup of tea, refusing any payment. As she finally walked away, her brief escape into the world of French poetry was over. The harsh reality of the bistro, the orders, Chloe's glare, and the 5 remaining hours of her shift crashed back down on her. She went to the corner table. The man in the suit had barely touched his coffee. He looked at her, his expression unreadable now, a mask of cool neutrality back in place. Will there be anything else for you, sir? Allah asked, her voice back to its neutral waitress tone. Just the check, he said quietly. She brought it to him. He placed a black credit card on the tray without looking at the bill. It was a card she'd never seen before, matte black and heavy looking with a single name embossed in silver, Julian Sterling. The name meant nothing to her. When she brought the card and receipt back, he was already standing shrugging on his coat. He took the slip to sign his back to her. He lingered for a moment, then placed the leather bill folder back on the table. Thank you, he said, his voice low and formal, and then he was gone, disappearing back into the gray, rainy afternoon as quietly as he had arrived. Era sighed, expecting the usual $10 or $15 tip. She needed it. Her electricity bill was overdue. She picked up the bill folder. It felt heavier than usual. She opened it. Inside, there was no signed credit card slip. Her copy of the bill was there unpaid. Instead, tucked neatly into the sleeve was a crisp $500 bill. Her breath hitched. That was more than she made in 3 days, but that wasn't what made her heart stop. Beneath the money was a thick cream-colored card. It was a plane ticket, a first-class one-way ticket from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey to Labor Airport in Paris, France on a private jet. The departure time was 10 a.m. the next day, and beneath the ticket was a small folded note, handwritten on matching cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was strong and elegant. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. It read, "A voice that can recite Verlaine with such grace should not be confined to asking if someone wants more coffee. A soul like yours shouldn't be trapped. I don't know your story, but I heard a piece of it, and it sounded like a dream that deserves a second chance. This is not charity. It is an opportunity, a gamble. If you believe in impossibilities, meet me at the Signature Flight Support Terminal at Teterboro Airport tomorrow morning. Ask for the Gulfstream G650 registered to Sterling Global Ventures. If you don't come, I will understand, but Paris is waiting." Just ard at the note, then at the ticket, and then at the $500. The sounds of the bistro, the clatter of plates, Chloe's yelling, the low hum of conversation faded into a deafening roar in her ears. Her legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a prank, or something far, far worse. The world, which had been moving in its predictable, greasy rhythm, came to a sudden screeching halt. Ilara's universe, once defined by the 10 FT radius around her serving station, shrank to the dimensions of the leather bill folder in her hand. It felt impossibly heavy, as if weighted with more than just a slip of paper. Her first thought was that the man, Mr. Sterling, had forgotten his credit card. That happens sometimes. She opened the folder. The first thing she saw was the cash, a single crisp $500 bill. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp. $500. That was her overdue electricity bill, paid with enough left over for a full week of groceries. Not the cheap pasta and canned sauce she usually bought, but real food, fresh vegetables, maybe even a small steak. It was a windfall, a miracle on a rainy Tuesday. For a dizzying second, pure, unadulterated relief washed over her, but then her eyes fell on the other items nestled in the folder sleeve, and the relief was instantly vaporized by a tidal wave of utter disbelief. Beneath the money lay a rectangle of thick, impossibly elegant, cream-colored cardstock. It wasn't a business card. It was sleek, embossed with the logo of a private aviation company. The text printed in a clean, severe font. Her mind struggled to process the words one way. Teterboro TB to Paris Lure LBG. Departure 1000 a.m. The next day it was a plane ticket. Not just a plane ticket, but a ticket to a life she had only ever seen in movies. Her fingers numb and clumsy, fumbled for the last item, a smaller matching card folded in half a note. The handwriting was bold, and confident black ink flowing across the cream paper. She unfolded it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A voice that can recite Verlaine with such grace should not be confined to asking if someone wants more coffee. A soul like yours shouldn't be trapped. I don't know your story, but I heard a piece of it, and it sounded like a dream that deserves a second chance. This is not charity. It is an opportunity, a gamble. If you believe in impossibilities, be at the Signature Flight Support Terminal at Teterboro Airport tomorrow morning. Ask for the Gulfstream G650 registered to Sterling Global Ventures. If you don't come, I will understand. But Paris is waiting, JS. She read it once, then twice, the words blurring into incomprehensible symbols. A soul like yours shouldn't be trapped. The sentence pierced through the fog of her shock and struck a deep, resonant chord within her. It was the most profound summary of her existence, spoken by a man she had served coffee to for less than an hour. He had seen her. In a world where she had perfected the art of being invisible, this stranger had looked past the apron and the tired smile and had seen the prisoner within. Cat got your tongue? Or did Prince Charming finally leave you his castle? Chloe's voice, sharp and laced with acid, shattered the spell. She had sidled up her eyes like a magpie's, zeroing in on the objects in Laura's hand. Her jaw tightened as she saw the $500 bill, but her lips curled into a triumphant, ugly sneer when she saw the plane ticket. Paris on a private jet. Chloe let out a short, barking laugh. He doesn't waste any time, does he? Let me guess. He wants to show you his art collection. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. Listen to me, Professor. I had a friend worked at a place downtown. A Wall Street guy made her an offer just like that. Whisked her off to the Caribbean. She came back a week later with a $1,000 handbag and a look in her eyes like she'd seen hell. These men don't want your soul. They want to rent your body and your silence. Don't be a fool. The insinuation was vile, a splash of mud on something that had felt for a breathtaking moment pure and miraculous. Shame, hot and prickly, washed over. Was that what this was? The most expensive, elaborate proposition in history? Shut up, Chloe, Aura whispered, her voice trembling. She quickly scooped up the ticket, the note, and the money, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped them. She stuffed them deep into her apron pocket, the sharp corner of the ticket pressing against her thigh like a secret accusation. Just trying to help, Chloe said, shrugging with faux innocence, though her eyes glinted with the malicious satisfaction of having burst bubble. Some things are too good to be true. Aura turned and walked away, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. She moved through the rest of her shift in a state of profound disconnection. The bistro, her workplace, her entire world for the past 5 years suddenly felt like a movie set. The clatter of cutlery, the hiss of the espresso machine, the drone of customer chatter. It all sounded distant and distorted, as if coming from underwater. She went through the motions, a ghost haunting the scene of her own life, her hand repeatedly straying to her pocket, touching the thick cardstock to confirm it was real. The walk home through the drizzling rain was a blur. The neon signs of bodegas and laundromats bled into the wet pavement. She clutched the strap of her bag, the note in her pocket, feeling like a burning coal. She was acutely aware of every man who walked past her mind, now poisoned by Chloe's warning. Was every wealthy man a predator? Was every offer a trap? Her apartment, usually a refuge from the world, offered no comfort. It felt small, suffocating a cell whose bars were made of unpaid bills and broken dreams. She switched on the lamp, and its weak yellow light illuminated the stark reality of her life. She carefully took the items from her pocket and laid them out on her small, cluttered kitchen table. The $500, the impossible ticket, the haunting note. They looked like artifacts from another planet, alien to the landscape of her cramped, struggling existence. Her gaze drifted to the corkboard on the wall above her desk. It was her altar of responsibility, her monument to a life derailed. There were the photos of her mother, smiling and vibrant, her eyes alike with the intelligence the disease had stolen. And surrounding them like a thorny wreath were the bills, invoices from doctors she couldn't afford, pharmacy receipts, and the latest from Meadowart Gardens. Its professionally printed logo, a stark contrast to the devastating number at the bottom of the page. $12,800. She picked it up, the paper flimsy in her hand, compared to the heavy cardstock of the plane ticket. How could she even contemplate this reckless fantasy when this very real, very urgent demand was sitting here? Leaving would mean abandoning her mother. It would be the ultimate act of selfishness. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to draw a full breath. She was a bad daughter, a failure for even daring to dream of escape. And yet a soul like yours shouldn't be trapped. The words pulled at her, a current of hope in the sea of her despair. She had to know. She couldn't live with the not knowing. It wasn't a choice between being a good daughter and a bad one. It was a choice between clinging to a familiar sinking ship or swimming toward a light on a distant shore that could be salvation or a deadly illusion. She had to know what the light was. With a surge of desperate resolve, she sat at her desk and powered on her old groaning laptop. As it worded to life, she typed the name from the note into the search bar. Sterling Global Ventures. The results loaded, and Aura felt the floor drop out from beneath her. This wasn't some small, shady company. The screen filled with the logos of Forbes, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. Sterling Global Ventures was a behemoth, a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate with divisions in technology, finance, and renewable energy. It had offices in London, Tokyo, Dubai. It shaped markets and influenced governments. Her fingers, now trembling for a different reason, typed in the name Julian Sterling. The man from the diner stared back at her from the screen, not in a candid shot, but in professional photos, ringing the opening bell, at the NASDAQ, shaking hands with the German chancellor, speaking at a TED conference. He was Julian Sterling, the founder, the CEO, a man whose net worth was discussed in terms of national GDPs, a legendary, brilliant, and since the death of his wife, intensely private billionaire. This changed everything. A man like this didn't need to lure waitresses with plane tickets. He lived in a different stratosphere of existence. The puzzle grew deeper, more complex. Why would he be in a place like the Hudson Corner Bistro? Why would he notice her? She kept digging, falling deeper down the rabbit hole of the internet. She found a lengthy profile in the New Yorker from a few years back. It detailed his meteoric rise, his sharp intellect, and his deep devotion to his wife, a French art historian named Isabelle Sterling. Her maiden name was Dubois. Dubois. The name exploded in her mind. A jolt, electric and fierce, shot through her. Madame Dubois, the frail lost woman from the diner. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was statistically impossible. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Her search now pointed in specific, Isabelle Dubois Sterling obituary. There it was, a tribute in a high society magazine, a photo of a breathtakingly beautiful woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a warm, knowing smile. The article spoke of her passion for French culture, her patronage of the arts, her love of 19th century literature, and it mentioned she was the cherished only child of Helen and Jean-Pierre Dubois, both retired professors from the Sorbonne in Paris. Ara felt like she was on the verge of a hysterical breakdown, a laugh and a sob, fighting for release. One final search, the last piece of the puzzle, Professor Elne Dubois Sbon. An archived faculty page appeared, old and simplistic in its design. There was a grainy black and white photo of a woman with sharp academic features, unmistakably a younger version of the woman from the diner, and beneath the photo was her title and specialty. Professor Diderrator Francis Special Leverline Rambu Baudelaire. The screen blurred as Aurora stared the pieces of the last 24 hours slamming into place with the force of a cosmic revelation. It wasn't random. It wasn't a proposition. It was a tapestry of fate. Julian Sterling, grieving on the anniversary of his wife's death, had sought refuge in a place they once shared. There he had watched a stranger be profoundly kind to his late wife's mother, a renowned expert on French poetry. He then overheard that stranger speak his wife's native language with a poet's grace, and finally, as an impossible heart-stopping climax, recite the very Verlaine poem that held a sacred meaning for him and his lost love. Chloe's cynical, sordid interpretation of the world felt so small, so pathetic in the face of this staggering alignment of grief, art, and chance. This wasn't a transaction of the flesh. It was a transaction of the soul. He wasn't a predator. He was a man drowning in ghosts. And she, through no design of her own, had accidentally conjured the one he missed the most. The fear that had been strangling her for hours finally loosened its grip, replaced by an emotion so foreign she could barely identify it. Or she looked at the ticket to Paris. It was no longer a threat. It was a sign, a dare from the universe itself. She walked to the corkboard and looked at the smiling photo of her mother. The real her, the woman who had painted, who had taught her to read, who had filled their home with music and books. That woman had not raised her daughter to wither away in a diner crushed by a noble but life-destroying sense of duty. She had raised her to live, to learn, to fly. "I have to go," she whispered to the photo. "You would go. You'd tell me to run and not look back." The decision born from a crucible of fire guilt and astonishing discovery settled into her bones. It was the most terrifying decision of her life, but for the first time in 5 years, it was a decision that pointed toward the sunrise, not deeper into the night. She turned from the wall of her past, walked to her closet, and pulled out a small duffel bag. Her hands were steady now. The packing had begun. The first tentative rays of dawn crept through the grimy window of Ara's queen's apartment, not with the cheerful promise of a new day, but with the stark gray light of an interrogation. Sleep had been a foreign country she couldn't reach. The night had been a long, agonizing vigil, a trial held in the courtroom of her own mind. On the stand was her entire life, and the verdict would determine its future. Her small desk was a battlefield of past and future. On one side lay her worn copy of Baudelaire's L'Île du Mal, the pages soft as cloth from 1,000 readings. She'd opened it hours ago, tracing the French verses with her fingertip, the familiar words a painful reminder of the scholar she once was, the woman who could lose herself in the architecture of a sonnet. On the other side of the desk, the harsh blue light of her laptop screen displayed the brutal mathematics of her reality, an online banking portal showing a savings account balance of 742.18 and an open tab with the Meadowwork Gardens payment portal, its balance mocking her with a glaring red 12,800. The ticket to Paris and Julian Sterling's note lay between them like a bridge between two warring continents. It was a bridge of smoke, beautiful and ethereal, but she feared that one wrong step would send her plummeting into an abyss far deeper than the one she was already in. She had spent hours oscillating between terror and a wild, unfamiliar hope. Every time Chloe's venomous words echoed in her ears, "Men like that don't give away things for free," she would counter them with the facts she had uncovered. Julian Sterling wasn't some shadowy figure. He was a global titan. His grief was public record. Helen Jeboas's connection was undeniable. This wasn't a random predatory act. It was something far stranger, something woven with threads of grief, poetry, and staggering coincidence. It felt like a chapter from a novel she would have studied, a plot so imbued with fate, it bordered on the unbelievable. "What would you do, Mom?" she whispered into the silent room, looking at the framed photo on her nightstand. It was her favorite. Taken on a trip to the cloisters years ago, her mother, Elena, was laughing, her head thrown back, sunlight catching in her auburn hair. The real Elena, the one before the disease began its cruel theft, stealing memories and personality piece by piece until only a frightened, confused shell remained. She imagined her mother's voice, clear and full of its old, vibrant certainty. "An anchor is meant to hold a ship in a storm. Ilara, not drag it to the bottom of the sea. You've been in the storm long enough. It's time to raise anchor and see where the wind takes you." That imagined blessing, a phantom of maternal love, was the final push she needed. The decision, when it finally settled, wasn't a thunderclap. It was a quiet click, the sound of a key turning in a lock she hadn't realized she was trapped behind. Fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But for the first time in 5 years, it was accompanied by its forgotten twin excitement. With a newfound, almost feverish energy, she began to move. She pulled a small, sturdy duffel bag from the top of her closet, the one she'd once bought for a planned backpacking trip through Europe that never happened. She packed with ruthless efficiency. 3 changes of simple, practical clothes, the Baudelaire, because leaving it would be like leaving a piece of her own soul. The framed photo of her mother, a small velvet pouch containing the only jewelry she owned, a simple silver locket from her father. That was it. Her entire life condensed into a bag she could carry on one shoulder. She walked over to her closet and took out her waitress uniform. The black apron stained with faint traces of coffee, and Holland's source felt like a relic from another civilization. It represented her servitude, her invisibility, her penance. She folded it neatly and put it aside. The practicalities were next, a series of final decisive cuts. She sat at her laptop and with a deep breath transferred almost her entire savings account, bounced $1,700 to the Meadowwork Gardens account. It was a pittance against the mountain of debt, a futile gesture, but it was all she had. It was an offering to the gods of guilt, a prayer that it would be enough to keep the wolves at bay for a few more days. Then she went to the bistro scheduling website and officially resigned her position, effective immediately. The digital finality of it sent a jolt through her. There was no going back. She wrote 2 notes. The first for her landlord was short and formal, left on the counter with her keys and the last of her cash for rent. It was an apology for the abrupt departure, an act of a responsible person she desperately hoped she still was. The second note for Maria was much harder. Maria, the warm, round-faced cook with kind eyes, had been her only confidant at the bistro, a makeshift mother figure who saw the sadness behind Ara's tired smiles. She wrote on a piece of notebook paper, her hand shaking. Maria, she began something impossible has happened, and I am doing something either very brave or very stupid. I don't know which. A man I met at the bistro has offered me a chance to go to Paris. Not for a vacation, he says, but for a job. A real job doing the things I used to dream about. I've enclosed my apron. Please tell Chloe she can have all my shifts. I know this sounds insane, and part of me is screaming that it is, but a bigger part of me knows that if I don't do this, I will die here a little more each day. Thank you for everything, for the pastries, for the chats, for making the darkness a little less dark. I hope I'm not making the biggest mistake of my life. With love. Ilara, her last call was the hardest. She dialed the nursing home, her throat tight. Meadowart Gardens. This is Brenda. Hi, Brenda. It's Vance. Oh, hi, honey. Calling to check on Elela Nena. She's resting. A quiet morning. That's good. Ara choked out. Brenda, I have to go away for work out of the country. It was very sudden. I don't know when I'll be back. My goodness, aren't you the jet setter? The nurse said with professional cheerfulness. Yes, Ilara whispered. I just made a payment online. It's not everything I know, but it's what I could do. Please, can you check on her later? Maybe sit with her for a minute and tell her, even if she doesn't understand, tell her daughter loves her very much. There was a pause on the other end, and for a second Brenda's professional veneer seemed to crack. Of course, dear, she said, her voice softer. I'll play her some of that classical music she likes. You go take care of yourself. Go live your life. I'm sure that's what she'd want. Hanging up, Ara let out a single ragged sob. She wiped her eyes, took one last look at the tiny apartment that had been her prison and her sanctuary, and walked out the door, not looking back. The journey to Teterboro was a passage through different worlds. The rumbling subway car was filled with the weary, stoic faces of New Yorkers on their morning commute, each person locked in their own reality. Ilara felt utterly disconnected, a ghost moving among them. As the cab crossed the George Washington Bridge, she stared out the back window at the iconic Manhattan skyline receding into the haze. It looked like a city of spires she was being exiled from, or perhaps escaping. The doubt gnawed at her. What have I done? Then she saw the terminal signature flight. Support wasn't an airport terminal. It was the lobby of a 5-star hotel that happened to have airplanes parked outside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive leather and coffee. There was no chaos, no shouting, no long lines, just a hushed cathedral-like calm. Feeling like a complete imposter in her simple jeans and jacket, she approached the gleaming concierge desk. Excuse me, she said, her voice barely audible. I believe I'm expected for the Gulfstream G650 registered to Sterling Global Ventures. The woman behind the desk, a vision of corporate elegance, gave her a radiant, unfaltering smile. Of course, Ms. Vance, we've been expecting you. Mr. Sterling's ready for you on the tarmac if you'll follow me. The simple courtesy of Ms. Vance, spoken with such genuine respect, was more disarming than any luxury. She was led through a private lounge and onto the tarmac. The sudden roar of a jet taking off on a nearby runway made her flinch, the raw power of it vibrating through her shoes. And then she saw it. The Gulfstream was a vision of white and silver, impossibly sleek and graceful. It didn't look like a machine. It looked like a promise. Julian Sterling was waiting at the bottom of the air stairs. He was dressed in dark, well-fitting trousers and a simple, but obviously expensive gray cashmere sweater. He looked less like a corporate raider and more like a melancholy philosopher. The sadness in his eyes was still there, but as she approached, his expression softened with something that looked like relief. Miss Vance, he said, his voice a calm baritone against the noise of the airfield. You came. You made a compelling argument. She replied, her voice steadier than she expected. Paris is a hard word to ignore. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It is, he said. He gestured to the plane. After you. Stepping inside was like entering another dimension. The cabin was a symphony of cream leather, dark polished wood, and brushed steel, all bathed in soft indirect lighting. It was the scent of wealth, quiet and absolute. A flight attendant greeted them with a warm smile, offering champagne, coffee, anything they desired. Ara, whose stomach was a tight knot of nerves, numbly requested a bottle of water. She and Julian sat in the plush, swiving armchairs that faced each other. The silence between them was immense, filled with the vastness of their different worlds and the bizarre circumstances that had bridged them. As the jet taxied and then accelerated down the runway, the thrust pressing her back into the sumptuous leather. Ara watched her old life, the gray warehouses of New Jersey, the distant silhouette of New York, fall away below. When they reached cruising altitude and the jet settled into a gentle hum, Julian finally broke the silence. "I owe you a more thorough explanation than a cryptic note," he began, his piercing blue eyes fixed on her. "I need you to understand that while my methods were unconventional, my intentions are sincere." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "First, Helen, Madame Dubois. She is as you discovered my late wife's mother. She is brilliant, proud, and since losing Isabel, she is also profoundly lost. The kindness you showed her, the patience, it was a balm to a wound I haven't known how to heal. Thank you for that." It was nothing, Alara murmured. Anyone would have done the same. No, he counted firmly, they wouldn't have. My assistant was supposed to meet her. He was late. The waitress who spoke to her before you was dismissive. You were the only one who saw a person, not a problem. But that was only the beginning. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. Yesterday was the second anniversary of my wife's death. I was running from it, hiding in a place filled with ghosts. When I heard you speak in French, it was jarring. Isabel grew up in Paris. Her voice had the same music in it as yours. It was like hearing an echo in an empty house. And then he took a deep, shaky breath. You quoted Verlaine. He'd looked away for a moment out at the endless expanse of clouds. That specific poem, Chant Dune. Isabel recited it to me on our first trip to the countryside together. It was a rainy day, much like yesterday. We were young and she was trying to explain the French soul to me, its love for melancholic beauty. It became our poem. To hear it spoken aloud by a stranger in that place on that day, it felt as though the universe was screaming at me, a sign I would have been a fool to ignore. He turned back to her, his gaze unwavering. So, I left you the ticket and then I went back to my office and I committed a serious invasion of your privacy. I had my team find out everything they could about Vance. I saw the Columbia transcripts, the glowing recommendations, the articles you published in the university's literary journal. I saw the academic star you were, and then I saw the hospital bills, the records of your father's death, your mother's illness. I saw the exact moment your dream died. Ara felt a hot flush of shame and exposure, but he held up a hand. This is not pity. He said, his voice laced with an intense sincerity. It is context. It is rage on your behalf that a mind like yours was forced to spend its days calculating tips and refilling coffee, and that is why I'm offering you a job, a very real, very demanding one. He explained the Isabel Sterling Foundation, its mission to support the arts and humanities, and how it had lost its way since its namesake's death. It needs a soul again, Alara. It needs passion. The Paris office is a new vital initiative. We need a director of research and cultural liaison, someone to be our eyes and ears in Europe, someone who can read a grant proposal and see the art behind the words, someone who can speak to a struggling painter in Montmartre and a stodgy museum curator at the Louvre with equal fluency and grace. The job description frankly reads like your biography minus the last 5 years. He let the words hang in the air before delivering the final crucial part. The position comes with a starting salary that will seem absurd to you right now, but it is commensurate with the responsibilities. I've already instructed my bank to wire a signing bonus and a 3-month salary advance to your account. It will be there when we land. It is more than enough to settle all your mother's outstanding debts and fund her care for years to come. This is not a gift, he repeated, emphasizing each word. It is a practical necessity. I cannot have my new director worrying about anything other than the vital work she has to do. Your mind must be free. Era stared at him, the sheer scale of his offer finally landing with its full worlding weight. He wasn't a mysterious benefactor from a fairy tale. He was a pragmatist, a man of immense means who identified a problem, her trapped potential, and executed a swift, decisive, and overwhelming solution. He wasn't saving a damsel in distress. He was hiring the best possible candidate for a job, a candidate he discovered through a miracle of cosmic chance. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unstoppable, but they were not the familiar tears of grief or frustration. They were tears of release of a pressure that had been building for 5 years, suddenly vanishing. It was the dizzying, terrifying, beautiful feeling of an anchor being cut not by her, but for her, in the sudden, weightless ascent toward the sun. Okay. She whispered the single word carrying the weight of her surrender and her acceptance. Okay. A genuine warm smile finally broke through Julian Sterling's melancholic composure, transforming his face. Okay, he repeated softly. Welcome to the Foundation, Ara. Now how about we get you some champagne? We have a new life to toast. The Allor Vance's story isn't just about a billionaire's grand gesture. It's a powerful reminder that our true selves are never completely lost. They lie dormant, waiting for the right moment, the right word, the right person to awaken them. It's a testament to the idea that kindness is a currency more valuable than money, and that shared grief can forge the most unexpected and beautiful connections. Ara's journey from a New York diner to a new life in Paris was ignited by a single sentence, but it was fueled by her own resilience and the courage to take a terrifying leap of faith into the unknown. Her story asks us a profound question. What dreams have we packed away, and what would we do if, on the most ordinary of days, fate handed us a ticket to our own Paris? Thank you for joining us for this incredible story. If it moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need a little hope, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the extraordinary and the ordinary. What part of Ira's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, believe in the impossible.